Week 1, Day 1, The History of Advertising. There are a few influences on the rise of advertising, and so we're going to talk about a few of them. The first one is the rise of capitalism. For advertising to become prominent in a society, the society must rely on aspects of capitalism. Organizations compete for resources called capital in a free market. Part of the competition for resources involves stimulating demand for organizations' goods or services, and advertising as a strategic process can be used to do so. Another influence is the Industrial Revolution, which began about 1750 in England. It spread to the United States and progressed slowly into the early 1800s when the War of 1812 boosted domestic production. The Industrial Revolution took American society away from household self-sufficiency to marketplace dependency as a way of life. Industrialization was a basic force behind the rapid increase in mass-produced goods that required stimulation of demand, something that advertising can be very good at. In addition, the railroad could facilitate large demand by expanding geographic markets. The third influence is the emergence of modern branding. If a manufacturer can stimulate sizable demand for a brand, that manufacturer can develop power in the distribution channel and force wholesalers and retailers to sell that particular brand. A factor that was critical to manufacturers' pursuit of power was branding. Manufacturers had to develop brand names so that consumers could focus their attention on a clearly identified item, particularly once the railroads started delivering products long distance for manufacturers' sites. Manufacturers began branding their products in the late 1800s with Levi's in 1873, Maxwell House in 1873, Budweiser in 1876, Ivory Soap in 1879, and Coca-Cola in 1876. And these are among the first brands to be branded. Another influence is the rise of modern mass media. With the invention of the telegraph in 1844, a communication revolution was set in motion. Most important to advertising was the rise of mass circulation of magazines. Also, it's critical to realize that for the most part, mass media in the United States are supported by advertising. So those are the four major influences on the rise of advertising. Now we'll turn our focus to the evolution of advertising in practice. Several periods can be identified that give us various perspectives on the process of advertising. The first is the pre-industrial era. This is pre-1800s. Advertising did not flourish before industrialization and the creation of concentrated urban markets, but it still existed in a variety of simpler forms. Handbills, which were painted or engraved wood or copper, were used to announce the availability of grocery products, household goods, and other commodities and services. Early printed advertisements appeared in newsbooks. These messages were informational and appeared on the last pages. And this is an example of what that would look like, resembling our today's classified type of ads. The next era is the era of industrialization. This is between 1800s and 1875. People who worked in factories were now called the middle class because of their regular wages from the factory jobs. Dailies were newspapers printed out daily. and that's why they were called dailies. Newspaper circulation was fostered by the railroads. Advertising was not universally held as an honorable practice. Without formal regulation, advertising was considered an embarrassment by many segments of society. The next era is the P.T. Barnum era. This is from 1875 to about 1918. He's perhaps the best known for his circus, now called Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey. Barnum is remembered as a huckster, a snake oil salesman, and a symbol of hype. Famous for the quote, "There's a sucker born every minute." Era named after him because it was believed he could sell anything, like circus acts. During this period, advertising ushered in what is known as consumer culture, or a way of life centered around consumption. And until 1906, advertising went completely unregulated. In that year, Congress passed the Pure Food and Drug Act, which required manufacturers to list the active ingredients of their products on the label. The ads of this period were bold and often full of dense copy with incredible claims, as you can see in this example here. The next era is the 1920s. This would be from 1918 to 1929. The 1920s were prosperous times. Americans enjoyed a previously unequal standard of living. It was an age of hedonism, and the pleasure principle was appreciated openly and often. Ads of the era encouraged consumers to have a good time and enjoy life. Consumption was not only respectable, but also expected. The average citizen had become a consumer. So here's some example of the ads from the 20s. They emphasize themes of modernness, the division between public workspace, the male dominant in the office, and the private feminine space of the home. Science and technology were the new religions of the day. And ads stressed the latest scientific offerings. The style of the 1920s ads were much more visual and far less wordy. And then we move on to the next era. This is the Depression era. This is from 1929 to about 1941. The Great Depression was brutal, broke lives and families, made people think differently about the government, businesses, savings, and advertising. As sure as advertising was heroic in the 20s, it was the villain in the 30s. People believed that advertising was part of a big business, and big business, big greed, big lust had gotten America into the Great Economic Depression. Advertisers responded to this attitude by adopting a tough, no-nonsense advertising style. The stylish and aesthetic ads of the 20s gave way to harsher and more cluttered ads. The themes in advertising focus on social anxiety, like losing one's job meant that you were a bad provider, spouse, or a parent, unable to give family what they needed. Radio emerged as a significant advertising medium. During the 1930s, the number of radio stations rose to 814, and the number of radios in homes more than quadrupled to 51 million. Advertising, like the rest of the country, suffered dark days during this period. Agencies cut salaries and forced staff to work 4 days a week without being paid for a day off. Here you have another example during Depression era of what an advertisement would look like. So back to the more clutter, get as much as you can on there, and things of that nature. The next era is the World War II in the 50s. This is between 1941 to 1960. Many ads during this era made direct reference to the war effort. The economy continued to improve and the consumption spree was on again. The issue of mind control became an American paranoia, and many people suspected that advertising was a tool of mind control. Stories began circulating in the 1950s that advertising agencies were doing motivational research and using a psychological sell, which served to fuel an underlying suspicion of advertising. So here's an example of an ad during that period, war related, about Uncle Sam and things of that nature. Here's another one where we're talking about women at home, men in the office, things of that nature. And then during this time, Americans began to fear that they were being seduced by subliminal advertising. On September 12, 1957, market researcher James Vicary held a press conference that coined the term subliminal advertising. He said he had conducted a 6-week experiment at the movie theater in Fort Lee, New Jersey. As viewers watched the movie Picnic, he used the special equipment to flash 2 phrases on the screen for 1/3000 of a second every 5 seconds. And the phrases were hungry, eat popcorn, or drink Coca-Cola. It was so fast that they were below the threshold of conscious perception. However, it affected their buying habits. Increased Coke sales at the theater by 18% and boosted popcorn sales by 57%. So later on, James Vicary claimed that he never did this experiment and this didn't happen. So to this day, we don't know, but a lot of advertisers are accused of subliminal advertising. I could do a whole lecture on examples of that, but nobody ever admits to doing it because it is looked down upon. So also during this era, we're still talking about the 50s. There were also about sex, youth culture, rock and roll, and the emergence of television to portray those images. Nothing like television had ever existed before within the U.S. households. Advertisers took advantage of this opportunity. This era saw huge growth in the U.S. economy and household incomes. Technology change was relentless. Television, telephones, the automatic washer and dryer, all of these things led advertisers to portray the modern life. The next era is considered the peace, love, and the creative revolution. This is about 1960 to 1972. Advertising experienced a creative revolution in which the creatives, which are the art directors and the copywriters, which you'll learn about more in this class, had a bigger say in management. The emphasis in advertising turned from science and research to art, creativity, inspiration, and intuition. The look of advertising during this period was clean, minimalist, and sparse, with simple copy and the use of humor. So remember, the creatives are taking over now, and so things are becoming more visually appealing at this point. Here's some more examples. Not as much copy, more visual. The next era is the 1970s. So this is about 73 to 80. This was the age of polyester and disco. Advertisers actually started to present women in new roles to include people of color in ads for a wide variety of products. The process of advertising encountered new challenges. First, there were growing concerns over what effect advertising had on children. A group of women in Boston formed the ACT, Action for Children's Television, which lobbied the government to limit the amount and content of advertising directed to children. Second, the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, and the National Advertising Review Board demanded higher standards of honesty and disclosure. Several firms were fined because their advertising was judged as misleading. For example, Warner and Lambert for advertising Listerine mouthwash could cure and prevent colds, and Campbell's Soup for putting marbles in the bottom of the soup bowl to bolster its look. The most positive aspect of this period was the contribution of technology to the process of advertising. Consumers began to surround themselves with communication devices. The development of the VCR, cable TV, the laser disc player all occurred in the 70s. Cable programming grew with viewing options like ESPN, CNN, TBS, and Nickelodeon. So here are some examples of advertising during this period. Now they're including people of color in ads. Okay, the next era is the designer era. This was from about 1980 to 1992. The average American had twice as much real income as his or her parents had at the end of World War II. Conservative politics were on the rise, people fighting for their rights. Several new high technology trends were emerging in the industry, which led to more creative, bold, and provocative advertising. Television advertising of this period was influenced by the rapid cutting editing style in TV. This was also the age of infomercials, a long advertisement that looks like a talk show or a half-hour production demonstration was born during this time. The E-Revolution begins around 1993 to about the 2000s. This stage one of the web revolution in advertising and ended with mixed results. 90s ads were generally more visually oriented and much more self-aware. It was believed interactive media would allow direct measurement of ad exposure and impact and thus make agencies more accountable for ad performance. Another significant change in this era is the center of advertising universe that moved west from New York to Minnesota, Oregon, Washington, and California. The last era that we're going to talk about is called consumer empowerment, and this is from 2000 to present. Phase 2 of the e-ad evolution has been much more successful than Phase 1 in the late 1990s. This Phase 2 we refer to as Web 2.0. Consumer control emerges in this era. Consumer began co-creating ads defined as consumer-generated content or CGC. Culture contradiction, social disruptions, and identity issues emerge. Business-to-business promotion on the web is enormous and referred to as e-business. And firms invest in newer forms of connecting with consumers. Part 2 of this same era is the Great Recession. Consumers are trading down and brand shopping and using private labels or retailer brands. Consumers are renting and sharing more. You have DVDs and Netflix. Consumers are shopping less with more purpose. And we're always searching the internet for deals. So this is also going on during this period. And then the last part of this period is brand and entertainment. The blending of advertising and integrated brand promotion with entertainment programming. Brand placement key tactics are used here. Some films, television programs, and video games are considered hour-long promotions. The example here, the picture here is a screenshot from American Idol where they promote Coke, and Coke is all over the set and the judges are drinking Coke. So it's a blend of advertising with the entertainment programming. To sum everything up and express the value of the history of advertising, despite all the new technologies that we have and we use with advertising, advertising is still a paid attempt to persuade. So no matter what type of technology we're using or new forms of advertising, it all has the same goal. Advertising will still contribute to revenue and profit growth and foster brand success. Big firms still spend billions on traditional advertising, meaning print, TV, and radio. Technology has changed the way people shop and the way they seek out information and control information. However, the same goal is still there even with the technology. This is the end of 1.1 lecture, The History of Advertising. Please enjoy the rest of your day.